Okay, so I'm here today with Nick Williams. Nick is a best-selling author, speaker, and leadership guide who specialises in inspirational leadership with over 20 years of coaching leaders and offering his own leadership. In the past, he was a director of alternatives where he met and hosted many of the leading thinkers in the spheres of creativity, personal and spiritual development. His own books include several bestsellers and the groundbreaking The Work We Were Born to Do. Nick has been part of hundreds of media features and has been invited to give inspirational talks in 17 countries and by many household name companies. His work shows how to combine the entrepreneurial, spiritual, people management and business aspects of ourselves in our work. And today we're discussing some of the aspects from his latest book, Be Inspired, Be Inspiring, Be Yourself. So, wow. Nick, welcome.
Sounds good. I'm interested to hear what I have to say.
Yeah. It's nice to hear something like that reflected back to you at times, isn't it? So, yeah. So my first question to you is that inspiration has been a theme running through your work from probably back from the time of, you know, the book, The Work You Were Born to Do, through running the inspired entrepreneur community and now into this inspired leadership. So why is the theme of inspiration so important to you?
I think I ask myself the same question sometimes. I suppose one of the ways I think about it is that, you know, especially, because it's been a theme around work and around business and around kind of power and creativity, now leadership. They can be jobs to do. You know, they can be material or financial things to do. But I think what's always fascinated me is, I suppose the language I would use is how can they be vehicles for our own soul as well? How can we bring our soul to our work? How can we bring our soul to our business? How can we bring our soul to our leadership? And to me, one of the ways we do that is bring a sense of inspiration and be inspired by what we're doing. And, you know, it's very easy to look around the world at the moment and go, a lot of people aren't that inspired about their leadership. You know, there isn't that much inspired leadership. And I've been lucky to meet a lot of inspired and inspiring leaders. So I thought it was time to share my thoughts on what that actually means. And yeah, so for me, inspiration is about soul, is about spirit, is about an aliveness, you know.
Yeah. And that was one of the things I was going to ask you is, would you say it is the same as spirit? Because you said it was like allowing it to come to us and cultivating an openness for it. So to me, that seems like similar to like allowing spirit to kind of flow through us.
Yeah, you know, I'm certainly okay with that. You know, my only reticence is I know some people might have objection to it. You know, so I think where I've got to personally is, you know, to be honest, it's still a mystery. But it's a very practical mystery. You know, I don't know how electricity works, but it doesn't mean I can't turn on the light and use my computer. I don't know how software works, but it doesn't mean I can't run all my programs. Same, really, I don't know what the source of inspiration is, but I know that I've been following it and that millions of people have been following it for their lifetimes, and amazing things happen as a result of it. So, you know, one of the expressions I use, it's like a bankable mystery. You know, we don't really understand it, and we don't need to understand it. But as you say, what we can do is learn how to be receptive to it, how to open ourselves to it, how to allow it. And I suppose in business terms, and why it's probably a bit different from a lot of approaches is, you know, generally business and leadership have been very masculine, you know, kind of areas.
Yeah.
And for me, there is a more feminine quality. I don't necessarily mean female quality, but a more feminine quality, because it is about receiving. It is about being open. It's about allowing in and receiving. So to me, that's a different kind of leadership, a different way of doing business. You know, a lot of people, you know, people can say to me at the beginning of the year, what are your goals this year? I don't necessarily have a lot of goals. I know the year's going to unfold, you know, almost on a weekly basis. You know, ideas are going to hit me, synchronicities are going to happen, conversations are going to happen, and I don't know they're going to happen. I can't put them in a business plan, but I know they're going to happen.
Yeah, I love that. And also, would you say inspiration is the same as purpose, because again, one of the things you mentioned in the book is that we can get caught up in an external quest to find it. And I think a lot of us, especially as we get older, we kind of feel like we need this sense of purpose and that. And is it the same thing, or is it is there a link to purpose from inspiration?
Yeah, and I don't know if it's exactly the same, but I think they're very close neighbours if they're not the same thing. And the way I tend to think about it is, that book that many people will have read by Simon Sinek about Start With Why. I think it comes back to the bigger question. It's like, well, why are you doing it? To me, that's purpose. And to me, the greatest reason to do anything is because you're truly inspired to do it. So for me, there is something about that sense of, when we're inspired, we are in touch with a sense of purpose that is a very willing sense of purpose. Because I think, I know one of the questions you might have asked was around kind of the difference between inspiration and motivation.
Yes.
And for me, motivation is often about we think we should do it, or we ought to do it, or we'll be in trouble if we don't do it. That kind of motivation. Whereas I think what we're really inspired to do, nobody has to make us do.
Yeah.
I go out every morning to write for 2 hours. It's not because I've got a coach or a mentor who says, have you done your 2 hours of writing this morning? If not, you're in trouble. I'm going to hold you to account. Basically, I can't wait to go out and write every morning. It's like, do I really get to do this? Is this part of my job now that I get to write for 2 hours every day? How good is this?
Yeah, and it seems like it's something that it's more pulling you forward rather than pushing you from behind.
Yeah, and one of the chapters, which, one or two people that have read the book already have gone, oh, that's interesting. I wouldn't have put that in kind of leadership language. But I've called it, one of the chapters, as you know, is about devotion. And it is about that idea. And I love what you just said. It's about being constantly drawn forward. When you're doing what you love, you don't have to make yourself do it. You are, I think, whatever this thing called inspiration is, it's forever drawing us forward to new iterations, new chapters, new projects. So I don't have to kind of sit there and bite my fingernails at the beginning of the year going, I don't know what's going to happen this year. I kind of have a faith that I'm going to know what's going to happen. I'm going to be struck by inspiration at various points during the year and things will become clear.
Yeah, that's a lovely way of being. And I loved also that you the phrase you used was that inspiration is like smelling salts for the soul. That really stood out for me. I just felt like, that's kind of really.
I love that idea. I think we are, I don't know what language, like magnetically drawn to things that inspire us. When I talk about inspiration, I might also talk about heart or aliveness or authenticity. Because I think they're also very inspiring. And, we've all sat through presentations at a Death by PowerPoint where we go, this is just so uninspiring. But when somebody's talking honestly and openly and they're putting emotion in, they're being real, that's inspiring to us. We're drawn to it. We want to be around that kind of energy. And I suppose the reason I wrote this book now is, we're in an age now where you can't make anybody follow you.
Yeah.
We've only got to look at what's going on in politics in the UK now. It's like you can't say I'm the leader. You've got to follow me. I think we have to, in the best possible way. We have to be inspiring.
Yeah, and I think that also applies to the younger generation. I see, people of our age have probably been brought up with a strong concept of respect for your elders, and that, and when quite often I see that we don't see that from youngsters today, and it's not that they're being disrespectful, but they want to be inspired by someone.
So that, for me also, meaning and inspiration are often close neighbours. Where there's inspiration, there's often meaning. And again, when I look at, say, Oprah Winfrey, I don't know if she still is, but I know she has been the most, the wealthiest woman in the world. And what's she in? She's in the inspiration business. To me, it's not just a nice idea, it's good business too. When you're an inspiring place to work, people want to work with you and for you and around you and be your clients. I think I may have put it in the book, but back in, I think about 2004, there was something like, I was reading the Sunday Times top 100 companies to work for, and they basically said, if you want to be a top 100 company to work for, you've got to be an inspiring place to work. You've got to offer inspiring leadership. Otherwise, people will go elsewhere.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
so it's not just, oh, gold, you know, now I've got to be inspiring, have I? You know, it's not just something to put on your to-do list. It's like, yeah, you know, inspiration is, I think, the doorway to a successful business.
And one of the things you did talk about was in the book was how traditionally we've been brought up to believe that we're rewarded only when we've worked hard. And if our work is easy, it seems frivolous. And I think that's true. Well, certainly true for myself, and I think for most of us. And I see that showing up in a lot of other people, that there is this sense of success has to be with sacrifice and has to be like hard work.
And self-martyring and long
Yes,
hours, and
yes.
I've
And I've
suffered
been
more
through
than
that, you know, in my career.
now I deserve my bonus or my paycheck.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's interesting to see it from another way, that maybe we can follow our talents and our own unique brilliance, and maybe things can be easy, and maybe we can play to our natural strength.
I think you've hit on you know, something that's so true, and even though the younger generation may not consciously believe that, I think often they've inherited it from the generations before, or they're working for people that believe that. You know, I remember a few years ago reading something about, you know, young people in Japan just not wanting to do what their parents had done, and kind of becoming quite rebellious and going, well, we don't want to work long hours for a job we don't enjoy. Why would we want to do that? And it's a great question. But yeah, you know, I don't know if you remember in my first book, In the Work We're Born to Do, I talked a lot about what I kind of traced to be called the Protestant work ethic. You know, I think it dates back to something like the 16th century. And I remember, you know, digging up a quote about it. It's almost like, you know, in that time, it was almost like, well, God hates you, but if you work hard and suffer enough, then maybe God will cut you a bit of slack. That kind of belief.
Yes.
So it's like, that's why we work hard. It's almost like we make ourselves suffer in order to then think we're going to get some reward at the end of it, from a creator perhaps, or from our boss. But you're right, you know, it's quite courageous, I think, to say, you know what, I don't want to suffer in my work. You know, I want to follow my inspiration. I want to follow my creativity. And I personally do believe that those of us that do follow our joy and our inspiration do find a depth of creativity that we don't find through struggle alone.
And I think
may
also,
not find through struggle at all.
Yeah, and I think also that whole concept of the Protestant work ethic, it was, it's not just about being rewarded by someone else, but I think it's this whole concept of you have to suffer now for something in the future, whether that's the next life or heaven or whatever. And whereas I think now more people want to say, no, this is my life. This is it now, and I want to be able to enjoy it and have those rewards at the same time as working. You know, so.
No, I totally agree. You know, that's it. You know, and the language I've come to use or think about more and more over the years is kind of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivations. That generally we've used extrinsic motivations. You know, money, success. You know, all those things to motivate us. It's like, well, if I suffer, then I'll get the reward. But I think more and more people are going, well, can't the work itself be the reward?
Yes.
Can't the satisfaction of working with other people and collaborating and creating something beautiful together, isn't that the reward in itself? And isn't it lovely to get paid for it? But I think, you know, what did underlie that for me, and I think underlies that for other people, is a feeling of guilt sometimes. It's like, well, you know, I've worked hard, I deserve the money. But if I'm not suffering and I'm not struggling, do I deserve the money? You know, a lot of people, I think, I have certainly felt guilty about receiving money for something where I've not suffered.
Yes. And I think, and that whole idea of that it can be easy and fun and light, you know, and I understand that as well.
Work,
yes. Yes.
And a bit of a breakthrough moment for me, I don't know how long ago it was, maybe about 10 years ago, but you've probably heard me talk about this, but I was watching a little interview with Leonard Cohen, and somebody just asked him the question. They said, you know, when you started off as an artist in the 1960s, did you have any kind of mission? And he said, no, I didn't have a mission. He said, but there was just one thing that I wanted. He said, I didn't want to work for pay, but I wanted to be paid for my work.
Mm.
And I think there's such a subtle but powerful distinction there. So many of us have worked for pay or do work for pay, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think, I like the idea, which I kind of started off with the work we want to do, that we are here to contribute some kind of work to the greater good, whether that's our writing, our speaking, our interviewing, our leadership, whatever it is. So that's our work, if you like, and we can be well paid for doing it. But we're not doing it for the money, we're doing it for the love. Yeah. And we love getting paid for doing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We do lots of love.
So why specifically do you feel that inspiration is important in leadership?
I feel like glibly saying, because there ain't much of it around as far
as that's true. Yeah.
I think I've got a little, just a little paragraph in the book going, and you've got to look at the Brexit negotiations and kind of think, well, why isn't the EU so inspiring that nobody would ever want to leave it? It's like, well, what an amazing place to be part of. And, basically, I think it's still a kind of, a secret that make something inspiring and wonderful, and you'll have people queuing up to buy it or work with you. I think a lot of people just don't get that,
Yes.
But I also think there's another quality to inspiration, which is, part of what I've explored in the book, and I love it, is that I think, I would call it an anatomy to inspiration. I think one of the things that inspiration wants us to do is to blossom. It wants us to take what's innate and dormant within us and bring it out, a bit like a seed. A seed has the capacity to become a sunflower, but it needs nutrients, it needs soil. And I think inspiration is one of the nutrients that makes us blossom. And I, you've heard me talk about this, I think, but one of the big lessons I learned was around my friend who I'd coached, but now has become a friend, who's been the executive producer of Downton Abbey. And, we've had a number of conversations, and she very, very consciously seeks to provide inspiring leadership, because she says, I work with creative people in front of the camera and behind the camera, and my job is to help them give their best performance, to do their best work. And I ain't going to get that through sticks. I don't even get it through carrots, she said.
Yeah.
What I do is say, how can I help you give the best performance that you can do? And that's a question a lot of leaders just don't even think to ask, because so much of leadership is about winning. It's often about keeping people in their place. But I love the idea that leaders have enough confidence, inspired leaders have enough confidence, A, to be their best selves, and B, to say, I want you to be your best self too.
Yeah. And it reminds me of somewhere where I worked for many years, where the culture when I joined was very much about, people being empowered, developing teamwork, trust throughout the organisation. And I thought it was an inspiring and motivating place to work. And then for various business decisions and that, we had a change of all the top leadership. And okay, the company was in a little bit of distress, so it needed some strong direction. But it really brought in a kind of command and control type leadership with everything centralised, and I felt personally that it was like treating everyone like children. It's like, this is what you've got to do, and you've got to do it this way. And whereas before everyone felt like they were adults and they had that space to do things their way or to try things their way. And so I think the culture that can come into an organisation by that leadership, it can make a real difference to the people working there.
I totally agree with you, because I think that, I don't know, I was going to say the majority, I'm making a generalization, but I think a lot of leaders think their job is to get compliance, which is exactly what you were kind of describing in a way. It's like when it changed to more command and control leadership, it was more like, well, this is what you're supposed to do, and this is, if you don't do it, we'll punish you, and if you do it, we'll give you a few carrots. But it's not treating people as grown-ups. And the sad reality is some people like to be treated like that. Some people want to be told what to do.
Yes.
But I think increasingly people don't want to be treated like that. They want to say, I want to be a grown-up and I want to deal with you as a grown-up. How do we have a collaborative relationship? If you're leading me, how do we collaborate on that relationship?
Absolutely, yeah. And then in the book you talk about this concept of self-sovereignty and commissioning yourself or ourselves to self-produce. So what do you mean by that? Can you explain a bit more about that?
Yeah, well, you know, it probably applies a lot to people that are entrepreneurial, whether they work in an organization or whether they're creative and artistic. But I think it also, you know, applies to leaders that run organizations or businesses or projects. And maybe I'll just tell the very quick story. I mean, you probably heard the story, but the story is, you know, the breakthrough moment I had was probably 17 years ago when I realized this. And, you know, basically 17 years ago, I'd got a 2-book deal to write my second and third book. And I was also recording lots of talks on my mini disc recorder with the intention of turning them into CDs. But I just noticed a couple of dynamics. One was I was delivering all the books on time. I was delivering the manuscripts, and I thought, this is really good. I'm surprising myself at how well I'm hitting the deadlines and all the rest of it. And then I noticed that I was recording all the talks that I was giving, but I was not turning them into CDs. And it just kind of bugged me a bit. I thought, why is that? Why is one area working well and the other area not? And as I kind of just thought about it deeply and meditated on it a bit, it suddenly dawned on me, and it was kind of obvious really, which was I was being commissioned to write the books. I was not being commissioned to create the CDs by anybody else.
Yeah.
And it was in that moment that I kind of began to realize that if I wanted to create the CDs, I would need to commission myself to do them. And I think what often happens is that we do get inspired to do something. So my thinking is inspiration in a way is always commissioning us with the next project or next part of our calling, our vocation. But then we go into fear or anxiety, or we kind of wait for somebody to say, you can do this.
Yeah.
But I think the harder part for many of us is telling ourselves we can do it.
Yeah, I was going to say, often I find for myself and for clients coaching them, is that, yeah, we kind of need to have permission. And often we're looking, probably subconsciously, we're looking for permission from someone else to do something. But I think what you're saying here is, well, give yourself permission to do it.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, and you're right. I think it's such a subtle thing, but I think most of us from from grown up, from parents to school to work, you know, we're waiting to be told what it's okay for us to do, either to be given goals or whatever, you know, given an appraisal, as opposed to going, you know what, I want to do this. And that won't necessarily work in some organizations, you know, but if you're an entrepreneur or if you're creative, I think it's almost incumbent on you to commission yourself. But I also think it's the most courageous thing you can do, because to create something and put it into a business or a world or an organization that's not asking you to do it, blimey, to me, that's courageous. That's big grown-up stuff.
Yeah. And I love the way that you talk about that, because quite often, certainly in the entrepreneurial world, I think a lot of people are out there with this whole concept of, you know, find your group of people, find your clients and give them what they want. And although, yes, logically that makes sense, but I think what I love about the messages from you, Nick, is that it's very much about, but there's something within us that needs to be expressed. And that isn't about going out and finding what people actually need or want. This is about something that people don't necessarily know that could even exist, but there's something within you that needs to be expressed out into the world.
Oh, I love it. You know, and I totally agree with you. I think it's finding that intersection between, you know, I think Aristotle called it the intersection between our joy and the needs of the world. But most people are just looking at, well, what are the needs of the world? What's the gap? You know, where could I slip in and sell something? You know, as opposed to, well, what's in my heart to share, and how do I package that in a way that people go, wow, that's what I need. You know, and I joke about it, which is kind of what you're saying, but I joke about it and say, you know, yeah, I was very blessed that my first book became a bestseller, but I wasn't receiving sacks full of mail saying, dear Nick, please write a book called The Work We Were Born to Do, because we're bored and stuck in our careers and we need some inspiration. You know, it was in me to bring it out.
Yes.
And I was very blessed that when I brought it out and people started reading it, it had a life of its own, and it did well.
Mm.
But if I was waiting to think what the market might want, I'd still be trying to work it out probably.
Yeah. And I love that. And I think it does, again, that is an example of giving us all permission to express what's inside of us. Because again, going back to what we were saying before, it's just like, it's almost like sometimes we have these ideas, and it's like, so we're waiting for something, whether that's permission or finding the right people who say, yes, I want this. But you could be waiting forever if that was the case.
Yeah, so I think it is about permission, and it's also, I think about learning how to, I suppose I'd use the word package, how to wrap up what we do in a way that does serve people. And also, I think to realize, increasingly, I realize none of us are for everybody. Most of us are only for a few people.
I think there's
so
also
our job is to be that clear so that we can find the people that we're here to serve.
Yeah, and there's also that element of being courageous about it. Because like you said, if you'd waited for someone to ask you to write it, it would never have got written. So it is about being courageous and actually putting your thoughts out into the world, what you're experiencing or what you're struggling with yourself or your ideas.
Yeah, and I suppose another way I express it is, finding what's universal about what's been our personal experience. So I did put a lot of personal stuff in the first book about what I struggled with and found difficult, and a lot of it was just the kind of conditioning I'd had around work, and obviously that resonated with a lot of people. And I think that's again what the more we're trying to hit the market rather than think about what deeply resonates with us, we're less likely to create that resonance outside of us, I think.
Yeah.
And I think the way I've come to see whatever we're doing is our job is to be really clear, really courageous, probably really creative as well, and that will have a resonance with some people. And our job is to be that clear so we can create that resonance.
And then you've said, and I know this is a theme from before because you've written another book all about this, but when we decide to step into our leadership, we're likely to be met with resistance, and that we need to overcome that and to face our shadow side as well. And I loved, I've got it written down here, I loved the phrase you use, that you comment that resistance is our ego's fearful response to the creative leadership of our soul. I loved that. So,
lovely, isn't it?
Yeah. So
I like it. And again, I think it's so important. I know when you were part of the communities that I was leading in London, it's something we talked about a lot. I think it's so important that we understand that resistance for most of us is an inevitable part of the journey. It's not a character defect on our part. And another bit, another little phrase I have, which I love, is, inspiration has an evil twin, and it is our resistance. But I think most people, when they don't believe that, end up being kind of tough on themselves, going, well, I know what I'm inspired to do. I know I'd love to do it. I just keep procrastinating. I don't know what's wrong with me. How many times have I heard that expression? I don't know what's wrong with me. When really what they're saying is, I'm just afraid.
There's something that I've felt a lot myself, and I've seen that in some of my clients as well. And it's also, I feel that one level of resistance isn't. It can be, yes, absolutely. We're afraid, and there's some deep underlying beliefs and fears there. But also sometimes that maybe where we have some sort of misalignment, and what I mean by that is like we're completely lacking a sense of direction or purpose, where nothing can necessarily feels right. And I know I've been in that space where you've got ideas and inspiration can come, but it's like fleeting. It's nothing to really strongly take a hold and pull you forward. And I think it's this, sometimes, as I was saying before we got on the call, is like this idea of perhaps we've all got either a sense of purpose, or we've got a theme that we can hang everything on. And without that, all we've got is lots of little pieces, and we don't know what direction to go in, because nothing kind of brings it all together. And I've certainly found that in some of my clients, and like I say, I've experienced that myself. But I don't know if that's another form of resistance, that we're holding back, we're afraid to commit, or whether it is just this, like I say, lack of alignment, that this lack of something, this thread that brings it all together. So
I think it's a great point, and yes, I can relate to all of that. So just a couple of thoughts here. One is that can be resistance. It's like, for most of us, resistance operates in a heartbeat. It kind of, the easiest thing to do is to dismiss an idea. No harm done, nothing to see here. What idea? It never even happened. Nobody would even know. So I'm very aware that it's very easy for most people to dismiss an idea when they get it, or dismiss inspiration. Secondly, I personally like the idea that the language, is, you've probably heard me use, is that we could either be one way of saying it is a portfolio person, where we actually do a number of different things. I like the idea of a Renaissance soul, because apparently Leonardo da Vinci, had loads of things that he was brilliant at, but as far as I know, nobody pulled him to one side and said, hey, Leonardo, when are you going to figure out what you're really going to do? When are you going to get a proper job? So I think many of us have what I would call many multifaceted souls, many aspects to ourselves, and they all want to be expressed. And I think it's important they all get expressed somewhere in our lives, whether that's through our work, through our leadership, or even just as hobbies,
Yes.
So I think it's important that we listen to each one. But I also think sometimes it can be a form of resistance, where we go, well, I've got some ideas, but until I get really clear, I'm not going to do anything.
Yeah.
But for me, I've had plenty of times when I've been not really clear. I'm a great believer that by following a golden thread, even if you can only see an inch of that golden thread, it leads to more.
Okay. Yeah, that's lovely. And that leads me on to one of the ways that you said that resistance can appear, is this concept of showing up versus showing off. And that the world seems to reward those who make the most noise rather than those that are most talented. And I've certainly felt that in the world of entrepreneurship, and I think more so recently. I think when I started, being out visible online didn't seem such a big thing, whereas now, with social media, the growth of it, it can be, to me, it seems like a really noisy place, that you've got to go in and shout at the top of your voice to get noticed. And I think for someone who, I know I've certainly always been a very modest person, it does sound like you've got to go out there and say, hey, look at me, how wonderful I am. And I know you've got this concept also of like being, whether it's grandiose or of your grandeur. And it seems a similar thing that, are you just showing off and being loud to get noticed, or are you actually presenting your best self out into the world?
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, well, I'll just speak to that briefly. Interestingly, that this concept of showing up versus showing off seems to be one that resonates with so many people. Often people say to me, that of all the things you said, that's the one that stuck with me. I grew up in a Methodist family. My dad was a lay Methodist preacher, and whether I got the messages or what, I don't know. But, I heard, be seen but not heard. Don't show off. Don't draw attention to yourself.
Yeah.
So that was my mode of operation. It was like, try and be invisible almost. Don't draw attention to myself, otherwise I'm in trouble. And when I discovered this idea of showing up versus showing off, it was a bit alien to me, but I'm also a student of something called A Course in Miracles, as you know, and I got this idea of grandeur and grandiosity from the Course in Miracles. And the idea is that grandiosity is of our ego, And, you know, there is obviously no doubt that the world is full of grandiosity, you know, in leadership and social media, everywhere. Everyone's making grandiose claims about themselves. But what I had to learn about grandiosity is that we often think of grandiosity as being an ego trip. But actually deflating ourselves is an act of grandiosity too. Pretending we have nothing to share, pretending we're not as good as anybody else is actually, you know, painful as it may seem, is actually an act of grandiosity. Because what A Course in Miracles, for example, tells us is you were created amazing. You don't have to compete to be amazing. Who you are is already amazing. Your job is to reveal your gifts, your grandeur. And I don't think you have to show off to do that. But I do think you need to want to be of service to do that. So, you know, interestingly, one of my good friends, I was just chatting to her, she's just left a full-time job to start her own business. You know, she's got an incredibly successful business going. You will not find her on social media. All her business comes from conversations that she has with people. You know, it's one-to-one, it's connecting, it's showing up in her grandeur. And people going, wow, I'd love to work with you. You know, but you can't find her on the internet. So I'm increasingly kind of going, you know, a lot, not all of, but a lot of the world of social media and stuff, it's a playground for grandiosity. It's a lot of noise, but not much is happening there, really. And interestingly, I was at a seminar the other week. Literally, I was giving a talk last Monday night on about publishing your book. And there was 3 of us, and one of them women there worked for a publisher. And basically she said, social media doesn't sell books. I'm not sure social media does a lot, to be honest. You know, it gets you visible, but it doesn't necessarily do much for you.
Yeah, and that's I think very interesting, especially for people who are more on the introverted side of the spectrum, because I think there has been certainly in recent years this again this push for, like, you've got to be out there everywhere. And actually, you know, more and more, I believe you've got to do it your way and play to your natural strengths. And for some of us, you know, those one-to-one deep connections, deep conversations are actually the way forward, rather than trying to be this mega star out there.
You know, and you know me, you knew me when I worked with Nikki, you know, who was almost 20 years younger than me. And, you know, at the time we were looking to kind of build a mass market business and try and reach lots of people. And we did fairly well at it. But now I'm a bit older, I'm kind of going, I much more crave deep connection with a fewer number of people. And it still poses the question, well, how do you get to know those people? How do you get into conversation with them in the first place? So, you know, I find the people that hire me because we've had some kind of conversation. And then I put a proposal to them and then they've hired me. How did we get into that conversation? Usually either speaking, writing a book, or something like this, you know, seeing me in a conversation with somebody that they know and respect. So it's, you know, somebody gave me a bit of advice last year, a systems guy, and he said, always ask the question, what happened before? And I've used that. It's like, if people hire me, what happened before? We had a conversation. What happened before the conversation? They heard me speak, or they read a bit of my book, or they watched an interview. Okay, if that's the way that people get to know about me and like me and resonate with me, let's do more of that.
Yeah, that's a great way of
figuring out the ways that are normal, as you say, that are natural and normal for you, rather than making a load of noise and not enjoying it and not having any impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Going against my own grain, you know. I think we've all got to go. We've all, you know, if you take those metaphors, you know, don't go against your own grain. Be in your element.
Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to talk about resistance or specifically, you talk about your shadow side, but what I found really interesting in the book is you talk about the fact that your shadow side actually includes part of your brilliance. It's parts of you that you've either discounted or you've hidden away, perhaps because you don't believe in it in yourself, you know. And you know, I think I've always looked at, you know, we've got our gifts, our talents, our brilliance, and then we've got our shadow side, and that's all part of being human. But yeah, that was quite an interesting concept, that actually maybe our shadow side includes some of our brilliance that we're just hiding, dulling down.
Yeah, no, it's such a big idea. You know, when I first heard about the shadow, probably about 30 odd years ago, you know, the way it was portrayed was, you know, the shadow is all the negative qualities that
Yes.
we want to disown about ourselves, like anger or competitiveness or aggression. You know, they're our shadow qualities. And obviously most people wouldn't want to say, that's me.
Mm.
But it took me a while to realize or hear people talking about the idea that actually we relegate a lot of our, whatever language you want to use, but we relegate a lot of our gold and our gifts to our shadow. You know, literally, you know, I'm 61 now. If somebody had said to me up to the age of, I don't know, 29, 30, are you creative? I would have argued until I was blue in the face that I was not creative.
Mm.
You know, creativity was part of my shadow. A, I disowned it. B, I didn't really value it. Here I am half a lifetime later, having written 16 books, talked around the world. I love being creative. I think it's one of the best things about me. But it took me halfway through my life to start to re-own it.
Mm.
And to even consider that I had it. And I think that's often the case, you know, for me, it wasn't so much midlife, it was around the age of, you know, 28, more like quarter life.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people, when they get to kind of midlife, they start going, what's happened to those things I loved you doing when I was younger? What happened? You know, I just got busy with career and family or whatever, you know. And often midlife is a time when we go, what have I neglected about myself? What gifts of my own did I used to love?
Yes.
So when I'm coaching people at midlife, that's often one of the conversations we'll have.
Yeah.
But also things like leadership, you know. I would have, again, argued until I was blue in the face that I didn't have any leadership gifts really when I was younger. And here I am offering my leadership gifts to the world and owning that I've got leadership in me.
Yeah.
You know, we deny a lot of good stuff about ourselves. Just to give you another quick story, you know, a friend of mine was parachuted in to do a project last year, a leadership project on a TV thing. And, you know, she didn't think it went that well. And, you know, it kind of went, but, you know, she thought she could have done a lot better job. And at the wrap party at the end of it, the cast and crew gave her a card. And on the card it said, thank you for the light you bring. Or thank you for the light you brought. And she was a bit kind of shocked. She was going, I didn't realize I brought any light. I was telling myself that I'd failed. And yet people could see the light that she brought. You know, she was that calm center. She was trying to bring sanity to an otherwise bit of a crazy situation that was going on. So I think we also relegate things like our light, our spirituality, our beauty, our radiance, whatever language you want to use, the goodness, the kindness that we can bring. We often disown that too. And again, because we think it's showing off to say, well, I'm a kind person. Thank God you're a kind person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't deny it. Bring your kindness wherever you can. Yeah.
And to bring it back to that whole idea of leadership, you've talked and you've given in the book some of the characteristics of what you would call a modern day leader, and you know, a few of them is like, you know, someone who's enabling versus that command and control, or someone who's got compassion rather than condemnation, and understanding versus judgment. And ultimately it's about love versus fear, which I know brings it back to A Course in Miracles. But, you know, I think, you know, and you started this off with saying it is perhaps some of those more feminine aspects that we all have within us, that is now requiring to come forward and be brought back into the foreground in leadership and in the world in general, I think.
I agree. Yeah, you know, but I think it's about them, and it's about the masculine and the feminine working
together in partnership. Yes, yeah.
I know lots of women that I love, but you know, they struggle to do stuff sometimes. You know, whereas the masculine side can get stuff done, but you know, there could be a lot of blood on the walls when it's done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Somehow, how do we bring that together? How do we bring results and the process be kind of empowering to get the results? You know, and to me, I think a lot of it just comes back to relationships. You know, again, you know, not wanting to make political points because I'm not a fan of any of the politicians at the moment. But I think one of the things Theresa May is struggling with is she doesn't seem to have built relationships. She keeps saying, "I've got a job to do, and I'm going to do it." And it's like, well, yeah, you need to bring people with you though to get the job done. relationships, I think, are at the heart of leadership.
Absolutely.
And obviously, relationship with ourselves to start with, are we tough on ourselves, or are we kind to ourselves? And then building relationships that are kind of win-win with other people as well.
Yeah, and I know,
Yeah.
I certainly know from my own experience as, being a senior leader in the corporate world for many years, is that, it is all about building those relationships, because it has to be give and take. But I think sometimes there's a fine balance, certainly in the corporate world. I find this more the case, that, when you want to help your team, help individuals sort of grow and develop and blossom into their own leadership, versus that whole pressure of getting things done and having, you've got to hit certain results and deadlines, and you're being under pressure to do more with less. And it's a fine balancing act, and it's a bit like being the manager of a football team at the moment, where you can have like a premiership team, or that's, you've got thousands or millions of pounds worth of talent at your disposal, but if you don't get a result very quickly, you're out the door. And it's that, that juggling act that you're always doing, and so you can't always allow the time and that, like you say, that environment perhaps for people to blossom and grow as much as many leaders I think would like.
No, and I suppose that's where it comes back in a way to the question that is in more people's minds today about sustainability. You might be able to get some short-term results, but are they sustainable?
Yes.
I think that's the question. And a few years ago I was listening to a Radio 4 documentary about leadership, and the woman who was doing the documentary was talking to lots of people, but then at the end of it she said, having spoken to all these leaders and been immersed in the area of leadership herself, she said, well, what metaphor would I use? Because often, sport and war are used as kind of metaphors for leadership, which again, often alienate a lot of women and often alienate a lot of men as well. And she said, she probably sees the metaphor being that the best leaders are gardeners.
Yes.
They simply create the conditions in which people can naturally blossom. And as you rightly say, how do you balance that with saying, but we need, results next quarter? We haven't got time. It's like me saying, I've just planted some sunflower seeds. It's like, I can't wait until August till you blossom. I want you to blossom in 3 weeks. How can I get you to do it?
Absolutely.
The answer is you can't.
Yeah. And I think that is a big challenge within the large corporate environment. It's certainly one that I felt, because you like I say, you want to help your team members and that and develop, but it's not always possible to do that. You've got to, that's not what you're getting paid for, as they would say.
No, and that's the path we all have to navigate. Is how true can we stay to ourselves? How much are we willing to compromise ourselves? And just how much are we going to bend ourselves off into other people's fears?
Yeah, and I think that is what is drawing more people to perhaps go back into working for themselves. And I think there is that whole renaissance, if you like, of us being like artisans, so that we're all trying to bring our own work out into the world, and we're doing it ourselves now, rather than working, the industrial age came along and put everyone into factories and large organisations, and now we're going back the other way of saying, no, actually we want to work for ourselves and do it our way.
Yeah, well, I think it's lovely when people can work within an organisation but still feel like they're doing their best work. But sadly, a lot of people do feel like, to do my best work, I've got to leave.
Yeah. And then also, Nick, you talk a lot about your brilliance, but being brilliant isn't enough, and you touched on it a little bit earlier, and you're saying that in order for us to really get our work out, it's about being visible and creating what you call our signature work, and also our personal brand. So can you talk a little bit more about that and like why that's important?
Blimey, covering a lot of ground here. No, I love talking about this. It's just distilling it down. I like a lot of people, I probably had very mixed feelings about the whole idea of branding, because obviously well, two things. Branding is sticking a hot iron on something and burning it. That doesn't sound very attractive. Secondly, so much branding has a commercial purpose behind it. You invent brands out of thin air that might sell lots of products. And the reality is it often works. Great brands really do work. They become integral to people's lives, to our lives. But I also was fascinated, that could branding not just be about commerce? Could branding be about something else? And the piece I came to it probably about 6 or 7 years ago was actually, we don't need another word to branding. What we need to do is like we talked about earlier in relation to work and leadership to some extent, is to give it another purpose. What if our brand were the most powerful creative expression of our leadership? So it's not about smoke and mirrors. It's about saying, this is who I am. This is what I care about. This is what you can expect from me. This is my reputation. This is who I've worked with. These are the nice things they said about how I've served them. That can be really powerful. It's facts, basically. Great branding, on a personal level, is just giving people the facts of how we've served them. But I've realized myself over the years that simply being visible is not enough. I've had times where, to be honest, I've been visible but not had much business. In a way, visibility has to translate into business.
Yes.
And to translate into business, I think, the language I use is what are we brilliant at? How do we serve people most powerfully? That's our signature work. And that's what to talk about, But I also think many businesses are about, the language I would use probably is about making themselves the hero of the brand. And I think the most powerful businesses make the client the hero. And I think that's where I went wrong for a number of years as well. And when I look around at most brands, they're all about the person running the brand or the business. And I read a book myself at the end of last year, beginning of this year, called Building a Story Brand. I don't know if you've heard of it, but I found it quite interesting. But in it, the essence of it was make your clients the hero of the brand.
Yes. Yeah.
And it just makes so much sense. It's like, well, if you feature how you've helped other people, people immediately go, oh, could you help me?
Yes.
Whereas if we're standing up and saying, look at how wonderful I am, the reality is most people go, so what?
Yeah. Yeah,
But
I like that idea. Yeah.
We can talk about the transformation that we've helped other people go through. That is really powerful. And as a result of reading that book, I don't know if you've seen it on my website, but I've actually created a page now where I've started asking people, how did I facilitate your transformation? So in a way, I'm making them the hero now and saying, yes, I helped them, but it was their transformation. I was the guide and the facilitator of their transformation. But in a way that I'm not the hero, they're the hero, I was the guide. And I think that's the most powerful thing to do, is position yourself as the guide and your client as the hero.
Yeah.
Or heroine. Honestly.
And do you think that, I can understand the whole concept of having a personal brand works if you're, I think both in corporate as well as if you're working for yourself or you're a creative person. But in terms of your signature work, is that something that can translate to a leader that in corporate? Because I do see that being much more about an entrepreneurial sort of business, or an artist or a producer or someone like that.
No, you're right. It could be more challenging in a corporate environment because, again, so much of leadership in that kind of environment is about what you have to do or needs to be done. And to some extent, they don't care. They just want it done.
Yeah.
If you can kind of align what you love doing and are most brilliant at doing with what needs doing, that's the best place. That's obviously the most powerful place to be.
Yeah.
But a lot of leadership is about roles. It's about position, and with position comes duties and responsibilities. Sometimes you might be lucky and really enjoy them and be really good at them. But I think you're right. It's not always easy when you're in a corporate environment.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, again, it comes back to that whole idea that I think this is why more people are looking to leave you know, the larger established world that we know, and want to work for themselves and do something that lights them up more.
Yeah, you know, and I'm sure you've had lots of conversations like this. You know, I often have a conversation with somebody where they say, well, you know, what I really love doing, I do for 3 hours a week at the moment. What they really want to say is, how can I make that 3 hours a week 40 hours a week?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
How can I build my whole career or my whole business around what I spend a little bit of time doing now?
Yeah. And I just wanted to pick up that there was another comment that I really loved when you were talking about personal brand in the book, and it says, you say that it's the ongoing illumination of the mystery of who we are. And I love that, because it is that whole sense of we're constantly evolving, but also I think we're also constantly bringing our own sort of brilliance into our own awareness, let alone out to other people. You know.
Yeah. You know, I joke, but I think you're saying it in a way, which is, you know, most of us are a mystery to ourselves.
Yes.
If you said to, you know, stop most people on the street and go, what are you really brilliant at? What's your signature work? You go, my on candid camera, you know. You know, most of us are taught just to do what needs doing. So yes, we're a mystery to ourselves. So yes, you know, it starts with self-understanding, self-knowledge, self-awareness.
Yeah.
And then how do we kind of package what we know about ourselves and deliver it to the world in a way that is what other people want and need, and facilitates what they want. You know, I've been at this for over 30 years now, and I still feel like I'm in a new place, but I'm still learning so much about myself and about the world and people and transformation. But it's having that balance of humility and knowing how much I don't know, but not denying what I do know.
And I think the other thing that I kind of wanted to finish with was that you talk about the power of responsibility, and as leaders, it's our responsibility to keep ourselves inspired. And I, you know, what do you mean by that?
I suppose what it boils down to in simple terms is, if you're not inspired, it's going to be hard for you to be inspiring.
Yeah.
I was just coaching somebody recently, and, you know, she'd had a 3-decade career in kind of retail, setting up new projects, and basically she was burnt out. You know, she said, for 3 decades, I have been the source of energy for everybody that I've worked with. And she said, now I'm exhausted. I've run out of puff. I can't do this anymore. So she was the classic example, in a way, of somebody who put out a lot, but didn't nourish herself.
Yeah.
And, you know, I learned a lot about this from Cirque du Soleil, from a couple of angles. Number one, you know, I used to get their kind of weekly emails, and I was fascinated when I heard that they had 2 or 3 women in their Montreal office whose sole job was to go out and seek for inspiration.
Yeah.
You know, their job was to go out to fashion shows, to concerts, to art galleries, anything that was happening, go out and say, is there something there we could bring back to Cirque du Soleil? I just thought, isn't that amazing that they, as a business, know they have to keep replenishing their own sense of inspiration and drawing on it. And just another quick story about Cirque. I remember probably 15, 16 years ago now, I was in Las Vegas running a couple of seminars. And I went to see O. I don't know if you've heard of it, but O is a Cirque du Soleil show at the Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas. And I went to see it once on one of my trips, and I thought it's one of the most beautiful things I'd ever experienced. And I was back there on another trip, and I wanted to go back and see it, but at the time I think tickets were $125. But I tossed with it, because I could hear my mum's voice. You know, my mum grew up in the Second World War, going, that's a waste of money. You've already seen the show once. Why would you want to see it again? And my answer was, because it inspired me so much. And the fact that I'm still talking about it 16 years later, it fed me. It fed something in me, and I still want to go back and see it again. So I'm not just saying Cirque, but I'm saying we all need to find what feeds our soul, what uplifts us, what makes us feel good about ourselves, about life, and about other people. we need to nurture our own sense of inspiration, because most people are not going to do that for us.
Yeah.
So we have to take that responsibility and saying, if I want to be a source of inspiration to other people and high energy, I need to do that for myself.
Yeah, that's great. So, Nick, with regard to your book, what would you hope that anyone reading this book would take away? What do you want others to gain from reading this book?
I think probably the kind of top line thing that I've wanted is to validate the hunger for, the need for, and each of our capacity to offer inspired leadership. I think, enabling leadership, leadership that's about freeing ourselves and each other to be the best we can be. So I think that was really the kind of motivation for writing it. So I want people to know that if they're feeling disillusioned with the world of leadership, there is another way, and there are already tons of people doing things a much better way. And I would like it. It's my contribution to a positive virus to spread that kind of idea, if you like. But I think also bringing it back to ourselves. One of the messages of the book for me was leadership is something we can all offer. We don't need a position. We don't need to be anointed or appointed or voted for. In any moment, we can offer leadership. And the way I defined leadership was to say, well, any act of love or inspiration or creativity is an act of leadership. So therefore, all of us can offer leadership in any moment. So it's the kind of democratization of leadership as well, I think, and the broadening of the definition of it, that you don't have to be a company leader or a political leader or a business leader to offer leadership. You can simply go, I offer something here to try and make the situation a little bit better.
Yeah.
So that we can all do it. So that, I think there are a couple of things I wanted to get across and to hopefully help people keep either light a fire in people or keep a fire alight in people.
Yeah, no, I love that. So where can people get hold of your book? I presume on the normal channels?
Yeah, it's all on Amazon now, on Kindle and print on demand. They can print it. You can get it from my website.
Right.
So my website is iamnickwilliams.com. So iamnickwilliams.com. Just look under books, or you can download a free chapter, I think, from my website as well. So you can do that if you want to check it out first, or obviously a sample on Kindle. And if stuff about what we've talked about here resonates, please, I always love having conversations. That's why I just loved having this conversation. So if you want to email me direct, it's nick@iamnickwilliams.com. Always happy to answer a question or have a conversation. And I just want more good things to exist in the world, and if I can play a part in that happening, I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Nick, thank you for sharing all of this today.
Thank you. I'm glad you took my nudge and,
thank you
dived into doing it.
Big nudge. But also, I want to actually send out a big thank you to you, because you've been a very big influence on my thinking since leaving corporate, and opened me up to a whole different world. And I think you are a real inspiration. You have been for me, and you are for many others. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try and be as open, as real and honest as I can be, and be a source of inspiration. So thank you for validating that I do that.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, bless you. Well, thanks for watching as well, everybody, and hope to meet you.
Yeah.